go. So I will be putting this on a YouTube and sending that out. Seth and Jessica Peitzig are a big family. They've got 3 little ones. Had coffee with Seth this morning. Dylan Cobb is on. He is a big brother, BBIL, big brother in limbo. Is that his little brother? Sadly, very sadly, moved to Virginia over the summer, but still talk pretty regularly. We were over there. Was that Saturday that he FaceTimed us, and we've known him forever. He's been in our kids' classes for a long time, and so he seems to be thriving in his new place. Aaron Shack is on we have a what we call the Abilene Council of Bbbs. Aaron is on that. Dylan is on that. The Peitzig, Glenn. So I think let's go ahead. The whole panel is here. We're starting to get some folks. So let's go ahead and start this. I will ask everyone except the panel to mute yourself, and then for panel participants, if you have if you're in a place with no background noise and you just want to leave your microphone on, that is totally fine. Or if you want to toggle back and forth, whatever y'all want to do. And for our Bbbs staff, anyone else on the call that's not on the panel, if you'll just stay on mute. If you have, when we hopefully we'll have some time to open it up for questions. If you'll just send me your questions, anything that you want to ask through the chat feature, and you can just send that either to everyone or just to me privately, and we'll get those questions going. So we're going to start with introductions of our panel, and then we'll kick it off. I'm really excited about this, and just can't thank everyone involved enough for doing this. I know there's a lot going on, especially the folks on the panel have things. They're obviously very busy in a normal time, and I know everyone is involved in a lot of different things. So that McCabe-Gossett's were at DIAS yesterday, and there's just stuff going on all the time. Jamila everyone is very busy, and I cannot express enough. Words can't express my gratitude for this, what we've put together here. So we'll start off. Dr. Stephanie Hamm is the Chief Diversity Officer at ACU. And kind of another interesting note, her daughter, Madison, was an intern with us several years ago. Several? Is that? Can
Several.
we say? That's
2018 is when she graduated, so 17, 18.
Yeah, I got 3, several, whatever. And it was very instrumental. As an intern, she actually helped our state agency make a fairly huge decision, which was kind of started by her. So it's very, very cool story, that connection there to Big Brothers Big Sisters. Jamila Thomas is our Senior Vice President for Corporate and Community Engagement out of our Dallas office. She was with Dallas ISD before this, and really excited to have Jamila on. I feel very honored. Jamila actually, and correct me if I get this wrong, I read that article that Pierce shared today, and I knew this, but to really dive in, Jamila wrote a curriculum on African American studies that the Texas education adopted for the entire state, which is really cool. Which just happened like a few months ago. It was like officially official, right? So it's like, I know someone famous. Well, I know lots of famous people. So that's very cool. We have Jasmine McCabe-Gossett, who's the Donor Services Director for the Community Foundation of Abilene. Very happy to have Jasmine. And her husband, Regi McCabe-Gossett, is the Business Manager for Texas Midwest Surgery Center. So Regi is on the call as well. So I guess, if you don't know yet, and everybody's names is showing up. Yeah. And then Grant Boone, June 26th birthday, shares with me. It's no big deal. The voice of the ACU Wildcats is such an understatement for Grant. Several other things. I always brag. CBS, PGA, golf, everyone knows. He's on the ticket in Dallas regularly. They know him. So he's also famous. So really, really excited. Dr. Travis Craver who is the director of Chapel and Spiritual Formation, Hardin Simmons, may join us a little bit later. So that's the panel. Really appreciate this. And let's dive right in. Oh my gosh, Dr. Kristina Davis, you're on here. Dr. Kristina Davis.
Mark, we're not friends anymore.
I know. And the thing is, Dr. Kristina Campos-Davis babysat me. She's probably who I'm closest with on this whole call as far as time knowing. Please forgive me. God.
What was that like last week?
Well, he still needs it every now and then.
When Jen
it's just Jen who hires me instead of his parents.
She wants to make
Mark.
Yeah. Dr. Kristina Campos-Davis is the Executive Director of Communication for the TSTC statewide system. So it's a huge job. So she's also a Big Brothers Big Sisters board member. Failed to mention that Grant Boone is also a big. So really excited about this panel. So let's just dive right in. First question. There were a lot of input on kind of the topics to discuss, and we've kind of got a template, I guess, we're gonna follow. So first question: what are some of your fears, or what are some, I guess, common fears, is another way to say that, when engaging in conversations about race? And I'm gonna put Dr. Hamm on the spot, and we're gonna start with her and just kind of organically go from there. So Dr. Hamm, and I'm gonna switch to speaker view. So your fears, common fears when engaging in conversations about race.
So I don't actually have a lot of fears myself because I get to talk about it all the time. I probably used to have fears about people that disagreed with me, but I don't have that anymore. Now I like it when people disagree with me, and I want to know more about what their thoughts are. But I think probably one of the biggest fears that people have is that they will offend the person that they're talking to. That seems to be a huge fear. And what I usually say to people about that is, but don't let that stop you from talking about it, and go ahead and take that risk. And then, be gracious and humble if someone calls you out, no matter who you are, on what side of on what side that you are or the other. So I think a lot of people have that fear. They're afraid to offend. I think that people have fears that they won't have an answer, that they don't have enough information or enough education about something to have an answer. I know that I have had those kind of fears. Now, I don't have all the answers, but I'm just not afraid to say I don't have the answers. So, but I think that's a pretty common fear.
I'd like to piggyback on that. I've got a dear friend, my best friend of 30 some odd years, who's been a pastor at a large church in the Metroplex. He's white. And he said almost verbatim what Stephanie kind of elucidated as a fear of some. He says that as he looks back, that he feels like maybe he might have used that as an excuse, not having all the information. We live in a time that is, I don't think it's ever been more difficult to know exactly what the truth is. And I think it's hard enough to get people to find common ground when everyone agrees on what the facts are.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't even agree on what the facts are. I feel like we're back in the late 90s with President Clinton saying it depends on what the definition of is. We can't even decide what the truth actually is. So how in the world can you even agree or even begin to find some common ground? And so what my pastor friend said is essentially what Stephanie said. That is, I'm no longer going to say, well, I don't have enough information. He said, I do want to take the posture of constantly getting new information and learning more and educating myself more, but I'm not going to wait anymore to at least initiate a conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think for a lot of reasons, somewhere along the way, we've decided there's the right things to say about race and there are the wrong things to say about race. And we've created a culture, and I don't know if this is a cancel culture issue or what, where if you say the wrong things, then you're done. We're not even going to communicate with you anymore. And I think, one of the reasons I appreciate Stephanie so much is because we're able to have that conversation and just be open and say, you know what, you can say that wrong thing and let's talk about that. And let's have more conversation about that.
Yes.
And I think that's what's important.
I think for me personally, my biggest fear about conversations with race is it was similar to the others where I was afraid to have it because I may not have all the answers, I may not say the right thing, but I think that's morphed more into the fear of that the actual conversation won't actually be a conversation. It will just be oh, here's my experiences, X, Y, and Z have happened to me. That is, that these are inherently racist behaviors that I've experienced, and then being told, oh, you're reading too much into it, or I don't think that was right, or you're a snowflake, stuff like that. And when you hear that over and over and over again, even when you're trying to have these conversations and put yourself out there and allowing these safe spaces, because I don't go into it saying, here's why your behavior is racist. They ask me, why do you think this behavior is racist? And I tell them. And that's my biggest fear. And I think that's, a fear that a lot of people have, is just not being heard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll just add that I think there is this sort of synonymous view of fear versus uncomfortability. So it's rather being fear, it's just so this uncomfortability that you don't know what people are going to say or how they're going to react. And so you'd rather just take a step back and not say anything for fear of being uncomfortable or making someone uncomfortable. Personally, I don't feel uncomfortable having the conversation because I know that it's wrapped in historical ramifications of race and history, and the people that are on this call did not create systems of racism. It is a historical sort of purview of what we've all have experienced that has permeated our culture for centuries. And so it's really having an understanding that it's if we can get past the uncomfortability of being a humanistic society that has lived experiences, then perhaps we could get over the fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jamila, the voices in the background there are giving me great joy. Thank you.
I hope so. My daughter and my nephew are here. My son are here. My daughter's special needs. So that's her laughter in the background. She's nonverbal. So that sounds like words to me. So I'm grateful for it.
Oh, me too. That's wonderful.
Any other thoughts before we move on? All right, here we go. So this is kind of a question 1B, sort of kind of goes into these conversations. What are ways we can address our own implicit biases? And I know you see in the background there at Jamila's house, the book, The Blind Spot, which is a book that Dr. Hammond also recommended, which I have, just not in my background, it's over there, but I have it. And so just, we're, Big Brothers Big Sisters Lone Star is going through an unconscious bias training. So obviously that is something that is very very powerful when you start to see the things that you haven't seen that are just right there in front of you. So what are some ways that we can address our own implicit biases?
I think probably step one is recognizing that you have it, and recognizing, where it comes from, and understanding kind of how you got there would be probably step one. One of the things I used to always tell my students when I taught college was that, we all have these implicit thoughts and these implicit biases that are just a part of our upbringing, a part of our culture, a part of everything in which, we've been raised in. And the key is to understand why they exist, what they are, and then not act on them, right? I mean, and to kind of be able to retrain your brain a little bit to rethink those things. But the first step in all of that, of course, is recognizing that you even have the biases themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think you begin with a general posture of humility, to Dr. Davis's point, Dr. Campos-Davis, sorry. to her point, if you begin with a posture of humility, of being aware that you, like all of us, have much to learn, I think it's a great joy as you get older to become aware that of how much you don't know. It actually can be a joy. At least it has been for me. And so then for me, it's about putting myself intentionally at times into groups, whether it be online, although that's fraught with many perils, as we all know. But it doesn't mean you can't have something constructive. I refuse to completely yield that space to the trolls. I think you can have constructive dialogue. It's really difficult. It's hard enough to have at times, even when you have people who know and love one another, constructive dialogue. But I do think being in groups in which you're not familiar, in which you're around people who do come from way different backgrounds than the one from which you have come, it just broadens you in ways that is hard to replicate otherwise. Whether it means, a lot of people say, they moved from a small town to New York City, and they're overwhelmed with just the vast variety of everything. I do think it's important to put yourself in groups in which you're not the majority, or groups in which you're not known, where your cred maybe has yet to be accrued. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I know for me, I have had to do some deep soul searching and reach out to other friends, because like Kristina had mentioned earlier, we all have our own unconscious biases, and really creating a safe space where, okay, let's get to the root of where did it come from, and then having friends that will call you out from time to time, when you're exhibiting that behavior. Nobody's perfect, but if you have friends that are in your corner and know that you're actively trying to grow and become the best version of yourself, you want to contribute to society, you want to help see that needle move, then you have people in your corner that aren't just regurgitating maybe the same things that you believe, that can challenge you. And so I have been trying to do that. One of my dear friends, she actually approached me about this book called Being the Bridge by Latasha Morrison. It's a fantastic book. And at the end of each chapter, there's some challenging questions, and we've been working through those together. And I'll admit, in the beginning, whenever she approached me about the book, in the back of my mind, I was like, this is going to be more for you than me, but sure, I'll read it with you. And as we've been reading it together, I'm like, oh my goodness, like I've been struggling with some of these questions. I've been learning a lot about myself and opening up to her. And so now I would consider her an accountability partner. Just like when you're like, okay, I want to achieve these health goals in my life, I need an accountability partner to be like, hey, it's Thursday, it's time to go run, So that's kind of how I view it. And it feels a little bit more approachable that way. And again, like Kristina said, and also Grant, like recognizing nobody's perfect and creating a safe space where we can all word vomit together and then clean it up together too. And so
Amen.
that's kind of how I view it.
With a small baby at the house, vomit is probably a part of it.
Yeah, it's top of mind for sure.
Yeah.
So I love everything that everyone has said. And I'm trying to think about what it is for me personally. And it is courage to think about myself in a different way, in a way that, so none of us want to know that we have a bias, because then we feel a little bit like we're bad people. So we equate biases with our morality, instead of thinking of it in terms of the result of being in a society that creates all of these, not just creates, but enforces and reinforces so many of these biases. And so I think for me, it is also having the courage to think of myself in a different way and realize there's no shame in it. This doesn't mean that I'm a horrible person. It means that I have eyes and ears and have been a product of my environment. And it also, it doesn't mean that your family members are bad people. It doesn't mean that your teachers are bad people. We are all products. And so it takes courage to be able to say, okay, this is who I actually am. On a more logistical, concrete, I can't think of another word, level, there is a bias test that you can take. Students hate it because they take the test and they realize something, and then they go, this can't be right. Like you can't cheat it. You can't cheat the test. This is it. And I think a bunch of Harvard scholars probably know more than you do at 18. So I think that is a really interesting one, and I've taken it more than once, and each time I'm like, dang it, dude, dang it, So I encourage people to do that, if for no other reason, just to challenge themselves and to be able to look at themselves and go, oh yeah, that's a possibility. Where's that coming from? What is that?
What's the name of that test?
I think it's AET, but it's a Harvard implicit test.
I know
Bias.
I'm gonna get that website. I'm gonna look it up right now. It's like implicit.harvard.something. I'm gonna find that right now. Because,
yeah, maybe just throw it in the chat.
Well, I had the same experience recently. I took it again, thinking, okay, now I've evolved. I'm learning more, and it's like, come on, that can't be right, But that's like, it's like holding a mirror up to yourself. Like, look in the mirror and don't shy away from it.
Well, I'll tell you, the first time I took it was years ago, before I was reading anything, before I was really growing in this area. I took it then, and I found that I had a small, they call it moderate bias towards white people. And I was so disgusted with myself and with the world and everything. And then I read that book that is behind Jamila, and realized that a great proportion of people of color have this very same result. And I was like, oh, okay. But it really did help me to open up and not be afraid to just be real with myself. So anyway, that's my testimony.
Well, one thing I'll add to this conversation with respect to the proclivity that we all have based on history, based on what we constantly are seeing daily, that holds up the value system of what is perfect, just, and beautiful, right? You can look at your TV screens, you can look at perhaps some of the books you read, you can look at the teachers that have been before you, from elementary school, matriculating through your college experience, if you did not go to college, maybe vocational school, or perhaps even the military. The individuals that served in leadership positions, who did they look like? And so it's not surprising that we all have a proclivity to kind of identify with what we think is right, just, beautiful, perhaps. And so those have to be shifted and changed, and not to suggest that those people in those particular positions aren't beautiful human beings. That's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying that society has given us a blueprint for what is deemed to be, based on historical ramifications of racism and race, what is deemed to be the ideal of a lived experience in America. And that precludes any other country, continent, or the beauty that would represent the value of diversity and inclusion. And so taking a bias test at this point in our lives, quite frankly, is going to shift based on where your ideology has landed in your lived experiences. When I've taken that test based on my own experiences, I have a proclivity towards African-American people. Why? Because of my experiences and lived experiences on earth. When I was born, my mom was very calculated in making sure that my doctors were African-American, that the schools that I went to were reflective of my culture, perhaps. Not to discount that my experiences with other cultures or human constructed races were not beautiful. And that's not to say, oh, I have white friends, so now I'm equal. No, I'm not saying that either. I'm simply saying that based on your lived experiences, those are the things that you have a proclivity towards. And because it's detrimental when society bakes the standard and then criminalizes those or devalues those that don't live up to what society has purveyed as the ideal. And so it's not surprising that we would take that test or any of these bias tests and have, regardless of what you look like, have a proclivity towards one particular ideology, because that's what we've been fed over time. And so that's why it's important that we are constantly educating ourselves and living in our own truth and valuing the experiences and being a part of organizations like Big Brothers Big Sisters, whether you work for it or whether you are a big, because you're being matched with people who may or may not look like you, or may not have lived experiences as you. That's the beauty of having context around the importance of education too. Right? We have the mindset, thank God, to be able to go out and seek. And for those who are not as able-bodied as us, like my daughter who's special needs, who's 7, my responsibility is to cultivate a world around her that sees the beauty of all that can provide to her, whether her teachers are Latino, Caucasian, African-American, Asian-American, that she can see through her own eyes the beauty of a person that is leaning into her lived experiences. So I just encourage us all, as we are growing and developing, to know that this is a journey that's going to take time, that's going to take effort and intentionality towards making sure that we understand all of our lived experiences bring forth a beauty that is necessary to unpack, while also recognizing that we can be detrimental in our spaces if we're not open to the beauty that we all represent.
Very well said. And Dr. Hamm is clapping. I like the reactions. I just learned how to do those. Are those new, or did I just miss the boat on the clapping and the thumbs up?
Not new.
I didn't do that.
Dr. Campos-Davis, thank you for putting the that training link in the chat. And that, if you're listening or watching and don't have access to that chat, it's implicit.harvard.edu, and then you click on, you're going to take it on a keyboard or a touch screen, and then it's the race IAT. There's several different ones that you can take, but it's the race IAT is that bias test that we were just referencing. So if we're going to move on, unless anyone has anything else to say about implicit bias, other than like reading books like Blind Spot. You just Google implicit bias, educate yourself. Don't be afraid of the reflection in the mirror when you really start looking.
Well, one quick thing, if I could really applaud what Dr. Hamm said about being okay with the idea that you were wrong about something. I've learned from my father-in-law, who is a scientist. We had a conversation about this years ago, and it's really stuck with me. Science welcomes new information. Science celebrates the idea that you could learn something that would prove something else wrong, because ultimately what they say is, now we know better. Whereas I'm afraid in our culture at large, we condemn those who change their minds. Many moons ago, there was a presidential election in which maybe it was Bill Clinton was accused of waffling, as if maybe changing your mind was something to be scorned or ridiculed. And science is the opposite. It's like, oh, we were wrong about that. Isn't that great? Now we know better. Other parts of life would say, whoa, 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 who was lying? Who was telling, fake news earlier about this, that, or the other? Science is the opposite. Great, now we know more.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the scientific method starts with a hypothesis, right? Is I don't know, but here's my guess. And then now let's do the research to see if it's true. And
Amen.
It's just, if we could all start out with that, I don't know, but this is my guess.
Yes.
Imagine how much better, our conversations would be.
It changes. You're starting from a completely different position.
Yeah, and to add, science doesn't depend on the single narrative either. You have your hypothesis and your test, and you move through it. Someone else has to replicate it again and again and again. And as Grant said, we have this culture where changing your mind is a bad thing. But we also have this culture of, oh, see, here's this thing that is saying what I believe, and it looks like what these other things aren't saying. And
Right.
therefore, how I'm feeling and how I'm thinking is correct. But if there isn't, correlation between that one thing and many other things, is it indeed factual? Is it indeed correct? And I think for implicit bias, that's something that even, especially for myself, I have to be acutely aware of, because I can listen to a podcast and stay in an echo chamber of my own feelings and thoughts and say, see, I'm 100% justified in how I feel about this thing. But if I don't open up my, my headspace to others, to how they see and how they think, my bias will just continue.
Great stuff. Very quickly, one other, talking about ways that we can address implicit bias, and Grant had mentioned, trying to not let the trolls take over. One thing that has helped me as far as social media goes, social media, the internet is very good about, you follow this on Instagram and, oh, you may also like this, 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 and this. Well, if all you do is follow the ones that you may also like, you're going to just be seeing the same thing. So one thing that I've done and encouraged others to do is follow an account that maybe you wouldn't ever. I had a friend I've encouraged to do that, and he texted me the other day and he's like, man, my Instagram feed is really confused. And I was like, good. Let's see some of that other perspective, because if all you're looking at is the stuff that you agree with, nothing's going to change there. So,
and Mark, when you train people physically, I know you've done this with my son, Nick, you've used that language of confusing your muscles. And,
right.
and what happens when you do that? You get stronger.
Yeah.
You struggle, but you get stronger because you've confused the muscles. And there is something, I think there is a metaphor there that we can learn. Definitely.
Okay, let's move on to this question. And this is really important, especially for all of the bigs that are on here now and listening, and will be listening on the YouTube video. How should we talk to children about the state of race in our country? And also kind of a sub question to that, why is it important to recognize and reinforce a little's racial or ethnic background?
Okay, so I'd like to start with this one. I love children's books. I love children's books, and I know I'm a PhD, I'm supposed to be an intellectual, but I find that there's a lot of really smart things going on in children's books. So one of my favorite authors is Ibram X. Kendi, and this is a very good book for a lot of reasons, but this is not the one to share with your little children. This one is. So this book is also written by Ibram X. Kendi, and it's fantastic. It has got some really good truths in here, and it's got really good illustrations. And I think that if you can find a good book to walk through, age appropriate. I mean, this is for little children, but if you can find a book that you guys can read together and talk through things together, I think that's really very, very helpful, because then you don't have to have all the answers, for one thing. You can be exploring together. So I don't know. I think my first answer is find a good book to read together, especially if you can find a book that has images that represent your little's culture. This one has all kinds of children in it, all different colors of children in it, and I think that's awesome too. But that's my answer for now.
I mean, I think it's important for bigs to talk to littles about their culture, because it recognizes that we all come from different places. We all have, different backgrounds. And I know it's easy sometimes to just kind of say, well, we're all, let's say from Abilene, or we're all, kind of living in the same community. So we're all from the same place. Let's not show off those differences. But children are smart. I mean, all they have to do is to look in a mirror, or to, look around their school or look around their classroom to see that some kids look different. And so recognizing that and having open conversations about, those differences is important. And I think, it's not something that one person can do. It's something that takes a whole group of people, whether it's a whole family or a whole, group of teachers and friends and other parents and aunts and uncles. And, it takes the village, right, in order to help us kind of understand why those differences matter. And I think the key that I would ask every big is to make sure that, we just always, stick to the idea that these differences, that yes, there are differences, but that they don't make you any less special to me, or they don't make you any less special of a person. How can these differences actually be a good thing and something that we can all learn from and maybe even grow together in? And so just pretending they don't exist doesn't help. But recognizing them, speaking of them positively, speaking to family members, how do you want us to raise, or how do you want me to talk to your child about race? That kind of thing would be important.
I think for me, it's important to talk about heritage and identity and race. And I'll use myself as an example so that, kids don't grow up thinking like I did. And I'm going to preface this in case my parents watch this. You guys did a fantastic job, and I love you dearly. Disclaimer, yeah. Growing up in a white family, biological mom, white stepdad, white brother, white aunts and uncles, grandparents, everything. I didn't really see my culture or my heritage in action really anywhere. When I went to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade, I experienced the severe culture shock. I've never seen so many Black people in one place, and I didn't know that it existed. I had never seen the hairstyles. I had never seen that clothing. I had, it was so different, and it didn't mess me up. I was like, okay, what's so different about me who looks like them, but I don't really know them. I don't know anything about my history or about, my culture. And it, I think my parents saw that, and they allowed me to, explore that through music, through clothing, through hair. I mean, I went from mainly this being my haircut to, having cornrows, to having dreads, to all that, to experiencing food, to going to shows. But again, I was 14 when that happened. My wife, Jasmine, is Black. And if you would ask me when I was growing up if I would have had a Black wife, I probably would have said no, because I just didn't know any Black people. And it's important that if you're a mentor of someone who's a different race or a different ethnicity than you, their experiences are going to be different. You can't force your own experiences onto them. You have to meet them where they're at and make sure that you are propping them up and giving them the best opportunity to grow.
I think with my little, who is Hispanic, I have tried to do with him, and he's 16, so he's a little older than many, but I've tried to do with him what I would do with anyone, and that is listen and take a posture of learning and asking him what he thinks about some of the things that are happening in the world, and how has he processed some of those events, and what has his experience been like? What has his family's experiences, what have they been like? And is it something that they talk about? And it's been really instructive to me to listen to him share in the way that a 16-year-old boy does. It's not in complete sentences very often, or a soliloquy, but it's really powerful, and it's in its brevity and in its content.
I like oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jamila. Oh, what I'm about to say isn't, I'm not going to take a lot of time. So Regi and I, we have a 4-month-old. So, we're just kind of dipping our toes into this parenting thing. But, one of the things when Mark posed the question, how do you have these discussions about what's happening? I don't necessarily have an answer, but I immediately thought about what are some other traumatizing things that might occur that as a parent you would have to explain to your child. I don't know, it might be traumatizing for their dog to pass away, or I'm not equating that. I'm just saying, like, how do you have those types of discussions? You do it in a way that's age appropriate. You break it down into bite-sized pieces. And I'm not saying that like it's going to be a cakewalk to have that type of conversation, but like, I guess think of it, if I had an older child, or if I had a little, I would approach it maybe in that way. So I was just going to throw that out there. But if there's another way to think about that or approach that, someone else offer a different, some different perspective on that.
I simply was going to say, I think it's important and critical for people, all of us, to recognize that we're multi-layered human beings, and we're multi-dimensional, we're multicultural. And so young people have to recognize that just because you see perhaps the majority of the time people that are in white coats that are Caucasian doesn't preclude you from seeing a person that's brown in a white coat that happens to be a doctor, or someone who's Black who's in a white coat, right? I think, again, because society has sort of presented this notion of what is excellence and perhaps what is not, or what doesn't equate, then our kids have missed opportunities to recognize and see themselves in the beauty of growing and being a dynamic human being that can grow up to be perhaps what they want to be. One of the things that I know to be the case is that when in Dallas, when they were, a lot of school districts and a lot of even NFL teams are removing names and mascots. One of the things that Dallas did was remove names from schools that were named after Confederate soldiers, but what they did not do was explain why. And so that caused a rift. So you have a child that's going to Robert E. Lee School, and then the next day now it's Keith's Park Academy. It's like, no, I've been going to Robert E. Lee since I was in 4th grade. Why did you change the name? And so now you've created even more of a disruptance when that could have been a learning opportunity to say, well, this is the philosophy behind the Confederacy, perhaps. This is the philosophy behind why individuals in society are moving perhaps away from idolizing perhaps certain soldiers, perhaps, right? So we miss opportunities all the time. Or when the young lady from, I don't know, it was Fox News or what show it was, but she talked about blackface, and then they immediately fired her. I cannot think her name. You guys know who I'm talking about.
Megyn Kelly.
Megyn Kelly, right? That was a missed opportunity. So we just counsel people out when that could have been an opportunity to say, listen, while you may think that's appropriate, let's recognize that historical ramifications of racism and why blackface has been so detrimental to certain communities. Let's talk through it. But just counseling that person then disrupts the opportunity for learning. And so now we're back at square one. So now somebody says, where's blackface again? And we just counsel them out, and now we move on. And so I think all of us have to take a step back for our kids' sake, really, to say, hey, what's the beauty of being a dynamic human being? One of the things I encourage for my babies at home is books like this, Black Heroes, right? That it's like 51 inspiring people of ancient Africa and modern day USA. So, I mean, from Bessie Coleman to King Tut to Mary Seacole, you guys probably even know who she is, right? There's so many different dynamic human beings that make up the fabric of our country that perhaps can stand alongside Caucasian heroes and Latin American heroes and Asian American heroes. And I mean, but because society has done such a disservice of bifurcating all of us, then we miss out. And so our kids miss out. So I just would encourage people that are raising children that are raising nieces and nephews or are bigs and have littles, that you encourage understanding this multi-layered, multi-dimensional, multicultural experience, so that when a child sees a Black doctor, they're not shocked out of their mind. Or when they see a Black astronaut, or perhaps a white astronaut, they're not shocked out of their mind, right? Because now they see that we're all dynamic and we can be who we want to be if we push towards and have people that are supporting us and pushing us along the way.
In addition to that, I think it's really important to have, I mean, I loved all that. It's excellent. In addition, it's important to have books or information or something about inventors of color, because I know that I was easily out of college before I realized all the different things that we use on a day-to-day basis that was created by people of color. And it was a huge big deal for me, because it seems K through 12, it kind of seems that white people created everything, and that's just not the fact. So excellent, love that.
Love the wisdom that we're getting. We've got 13 minutes, and we do have a couple of questions, and so maybe we can hit one of these questions. And I might even ask at the very end, so the panel maybe be thinking about like maybe one or two resources. I know everything that's been mentioned, and even in the notes, I'm going to put all these in the show notes or the YouTube video notes when we send this out. So all of these things, Whistling Vivaldi, I think was mentioned in the chat. So all these things, but maybe one or two other resources, whether it's a website or an Instagram, whatever, just kind of be thinking about that. But one of the questions from Jessica Peitzig, who is part of one of our big families, and it's for Dr. Hamm. And Jessica, if you need to unmute and clarify anything as I read this, feel free. And it says, Stephanie, in response to the "be a good person" syndrome, do you find efforts by the white community to rectify the past with semantic changes is a good step or a misguided effort to the changing our social mindsets?
Well, I have found that changing wording makes us feel better. And so I think that it's a caution. I think it should be done with caution, because when we feel better, we don't address things to the extent and to the depth that we need to. So there is another book called White Fragility. I don't know how many of y'all have heard of that book, but it's a very good book. It's written by
DiAngelo.
Yeah, Robin DiAngelo. She is a white woman. I think she's a social worker, which makes her awesome. I'm a social worker.
There's your implicit bias.
That's right. But she talks about a lot of things that white people do, and ways that white people have reacted to this kind of what happened in possibly the guilt or shame or whatever it is. And I get not wanting to feel uncomfortable. However, sometimes not wanting to feel uncomfortable really keeps us from doing the best work for ourselves. And so, I mean, is there a specific terminology that you're talking about, Jessica?
It's really from Seth, Jessica's husband, and she wanted to put that disclaimer out as well. No, it's not necessarily, well, like one that was across was the housing market was going to change master bedroom to just like large bedroom or something like that. And on my Instagram, what I was following, the Black community was like, I don't need you to change the name of master bedroom. I need you to make it to where I can get home loans. Like I'm looking for real social change. I'm not looking for semantics. And so I kind of gave that as an example, but kind of the white savior syndrome was probably more what I was looking for than really be a good person. But as I was typing, that's all what I came up with. That we try to step in and say, and maybe out of that shame that you were talking about, but that need to, like, we want change, and we want for us to have the same opportunities, and we want the burdens that we know historically have been placed on the Black community, and much to my dismay, until about 2015, the current burdens that are on the community. I mean, I was oblivious until social media kind of opened my eyes to, this isn't over. We're not done. I thought with Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, we were all even, and the life was supposed to look like for everybody.
So now I have a different answer. Not a different answer. I have an extension, because some of that terminology, for example, master bedroom, is saying we do not want to continue to reinforce this idea of discrimination and what is this, the whole plantation idea. I mean, that comes from the whole plantation idea. And so sometimes, depending on the reason why we're changing this terminology, because there are some words that we really absolutely should not use. The word gypped, we often say something about, I got gypped. Well, that's not spelled J-I-P-P-E-D. That's spelled G-Y-P-E-D, as in gypsies. So it is a microaggression to say that. So you have to think about it in those ways, but saviorism is a real thing. and so maybe thinking also about who is changing the terminology and why. Right. That's an excellent question.
Thank you. Did you hear that?
Any other, I think Jessica asked a question. Anybody else want to, I know another term that I heard recently, and my knee-jerk reaction was, really? But then when the more I thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, that, like NFL owners, right? Owners of sports franchises, where you have every NFL owner is a white man, and then you look at the makeup of the players in the NFL or whatever, and it's like, yeah, golly, we need to change that, And so, any other thoughts on that from any of the other panelists?
And I would just kind of add on to what Stephanie said, and just kind of, just because we changed the title of something doesn't mean we've changed all the implicit bias, all of the discrimination, all of the other things that have led into that. And so, I think we often, we'll change the name of something and be like, great, we're done, on to the next thing, and not really think through, okay, but how did we get here? And what is this word re-emphasizing? And if it's a microaggression, then what is that microaggression doing to other people? And how can we understand how we can get rid of this word, but then also get rid of everything that created the need for that word, if that makes sense.
And I think it kind of gets to the bottom of what systemic racism is in America. You can relabel stuff and relabel things, but as to Seth's question and his example, cool, you changed it from master bedroom to large bedroom, but there is still there's an unfair calculation that's going on for people of color to get home loans, or there's an unfair unreasonable amount of people of color behind bars for small infractions where if a person or if a white person did it, it's not there. And you can relabel, you can rename, but it doesn't address the fact that those systems aren't being dismantled. They're staying the same. They're just being called something different.
I'm not on the panel, but if I can follow that up, is that okay, Mark, and everybody else?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. So Regi, right along those lines is, I made the Fresh Prince joke earlier, but I'm really, that's only sort of a half joke, that we accepted the Black culture, and then we forgot to, or maybe excused ourselves from looking for those elements of systemic racism that were there, but we essentially culturally had our Black friends. You were front line and center. Hip hop was king. The sitcoms were Black oriented, and the humor with Black comedians were coming up strong. And I think, Regi, right along with what you're saying, is we accepted those as, look how far we've come, and we didn't do a whole lot for the Black community as a whole. I say that to follow up with this. We've talked a lot about conversations, and man, I believe in conversations. I teach communication at McMurray and do some consulting along those lines, so I know how important conversations are. But it feels like injustice has gone on for so injustice. I'll let you choose. has gone on for so long that one-on-one conversations, man, that's a slow but needed approach. Is there a not fast answer? I know we're not going to have a fast answer, but is there a steady, more incrementally moving forward than, well, as we teach our children, maybe the next generation will fix this? And now I'll stop.
One thing I'll add to that, or suggest, as we are really trying to unpack why we've celebrated certain cultural accomplishments, right? Whether it's a TV show, comedians, we're saying, you know, even the president, we've made it thus far. Perhaps what we have not done is juxtapose that against why we are celebrating them and dealing with the root causes of why having a Black president would even be celebrated in the first place, right? That historically, we've never had one, you know? So when you begin to sort of unpack these celebratory accomplishments as being the first this or the first that, we don't deal with why we've had to have a first this or first that, which then opens up the conversation to a broader scope of understanding around, for those of us who perhaps are in those communities, okay, yeah, it's great, but that does not mean we have made it, because we're still utilizing language that would suggest people don't understand. Dr. Hamm mentioned this idea of microaggressions. That's critically important to unpack, because even where are you from can be considered a microaggression in the wrong space. I'm sorry, the gentleman, Seth, if we have not developed, to your point, the relationship via communication. Seth, if you and I have a great relationship, you ask me where I'm from, I'm gonna say Oak Cliff. That's in Texas. That's Dallas. Look up Oak Cliff, right? But if you did not know me and we're having this conversation, you say, but no, where are you really from? I could say, I don't know, because my ancestors were on slave ships, right? It could go real deep, real quick to 100 real fast. So it's critically important that relationship building, so that we can have these critical conversations and have not necessarily a result ending with a result, but just an understanding that we are all on this journey together, and that, you know, there has to be intentionality around building bridges, because the bridges, quite frankly, are either burning, have not been built, or don't want to be built. They're taking the ramps off before they even get to the other side. So it's important that we all begin to bring people into the fold that perhaps would not want to be in the fold to have these conversations, so that we can bridge gaps that have been there for centuries. And I will end with saying that one of the ways I know that we can build bridges and understand where we're coming from is reading. Like, simply read. Pick up books that perhaps are dealing with history, so that you can really grapple with the context around what's happening and why it's happening. People are asking, well, why is COVID impacting the Black and brown communities more? Well, if you dig just a little bit, you'll see how the ramifications of systemic racism have just been unraveling, like almost like it's like peeling back these onions, right? And once you get to the core of that, those layers will make a whole lot of sense. They'll make a whole lot of sense. But we all have to do our job in reading and learning. And I think that's the beauty of education, that God willing, if you have the opportunity to actually read or to listen, right? Or if you are in the deaf community, perhaps having something that would provide opportunity for you to gain knowledge, right? Then we would be in such a better place. When the President of the United States makes comments around not understanding certain things that all of us seem to be very clear to us, and he's made it very clear that he does not read, well, there's your answer. It comes off real, it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I just would encourage us to continue to read and to learn and to grow collectively.
All right, it is 101. And let's see, I'm making a note. Just very, very quickly, if each panelist just wants to go, maybe give one resource, either a book, even if you've already given one, either repeat that one, or if there's another one out there. Again, I see Dr. Hamm said an Instagram for us to follow. I'll put that in the notes. Anything like that, a website, book, publication, anything, and we'll start with Dr. Hamm, and then we'll go there, and then we'll wrap up.
Oh my gosh, I have so many.
Yeah, it's hard to choose.
I already talked about this one, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Very good book. White Fragility is good. Someone mentioned Be the Bridge, another really good one. Jasmine did. But also, gosh, there's just so many good things. You can follow people on Instagram that really break things down. Rachel Cargill is a great one to follow on Instagram. I put on here Ali Henny, Layla F. Saad is one of my favorites. She's wonderful. She wrote White Supremacy and Me is the book that she wrote, but she's really great on Instagram. I mean, Austin Channing Brown is wonderful, and she's the one that came here to our school last year. She wrote I'm Still Here. Okay.
Yep, I have that one too over there.
I can go on, so I'll stop there.
Jamila?
So I recommend my little bookshelf here. There's a book called The Color of Law. Actually, I'm digging through that book right now. The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein is excellent. The Color of Law. And then the last one I would recommend would be An African and Latinx History of the United States. So this idea of collaborative empowerment is critically important. And that's sort of where I gain my sort of humanity as it relates to us all coming together and recognizing the beauty that we all are living these experiences. And if we can somehow see the human resiliency in all of our stories, whether you're Caucasian, whether you're Latinx, whether you're African American, whether you're Asian American, Pacific Islander, that every story has a story of human resiliency, every single one. And I think that's the tie that binds us all together. But you don't know that unless you read about it and learn more. So those are the two books, The Color of Law. Yeah, there it is. Let's see. I'm going to stand.
Perfect. Apologies. Awesome. Let's go to Jasmine.
Oh, I was trying to gather things really quickly. So yeah, I did mention that book, Be the Bridge by Latasha Morrison. But if you're more like, I enjoy reading books, but I enjoy listening, and I also enjoy watching. And so if I were to encourage you to watch something on Netflix, there's a movie called When They See Us, and then there's a documentary called 13th that I would recommend. If you're a podcast person, I would recommend a podcast called 1619. All of these are really great resources. And again, reading is awesome. We talked about that earlier, but if you wanted to try to engage in a different way, I would encourage those resources.
Love it. Thank you very much. Regi.
So I have a podcast that I listen to called The Nod by Gimlet Media. It's on Spotify. And it is multiple, tons of different stories from Black people all around the country. About their experiences, about what they do, where they've come from. And it's been really eye-opening for me, and I've enjoyed listening to it. And then a book, and it's not, it's not like the others. It's actually a management book, technically, but it's called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And what it does is it helps leaders develop cultures that create, highly motivated, highly cohesive cultures, but it focuses on creating safe spaces to have conversations about anything. And so even though it is a management book and built for business, it is very applicable for the individual, especially having conversations about race or just having conversations in general about implicit bias and all that stuff.
Awesome. Grant?
I would echo many of these. 13th was powerful, the documentary. Austin Channing Brown's I'm Still Here. One of the winning lines I thought in her book was when she said how weary she has gotten, she being Black, from white people coming up to basically ask her to absolve them of their or their families or their people's past sins or present sins of racism. I think she said something along the lines of, I'm not your priest, you know, and she said it unapologetically. I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm glad that you've reached some level of awareness of it, but don't come to me. I witnessed it firsthand in 2012 when ACU honored the first 2 African-American graduates. They were in the class of 64. We brought them back, and they weren't even allowed to live on campus back then when they enrolled in 1962. And they didn't walk when they graduated, so we gave them class rings, and we gave them, you know, their diplomas. They got their diplomas, but we gave them class rings, and many of their classmates from the class of 64 just swarmed them with apologies, you know, and I could sense their tension, like, hey, it's 50 years on since then. You don't need any forgiveness from me. So that I think Austin Channing Brown's book was helpful. I haven't read Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby, but I feel like I have because my wife read me about every other paragraph as she was reading through it, and it is just the excerpts I've read are powerful, and I look forward to reading that one. And then being a radio man, as I am in TV, but radio, I listen to a podcast called Seeing White, and I will try to send you, Mark, so you can add it. It was from 2017, I believe, and it's a white public radio narrator going through his education into how race even came to be a thing, which it wasn't until someone's shocker, white guy, decided that it would be a good way to classify people. And here's another shocker, that person who created the concept of race decided that Caucasians were the best. Who knew? So that one was powerful. And he has one thing I love about that podcast is that he ends each episode, I think it's 14 parts, with a conversation with one of his friends, a guy named Chinjirai Kumanika, who's a professor at Rutgers. And he says, okay, here's what we processed. Here's what I think I heard in this installment of the podcast. What did I miss? Did I hear that correctly? It's a way of doing what we said at the very beginning of this Zoom call, identifying potential blind spots. You're asking someone to help you think through it, which I think is good. I also want to close just by saying, just because you read something, and this is for me, it doesn't mean that every single thing you read you have to adopt. It doesn't mean every single thing you read you have to agree with. Mm-hmm. It's just a way of understanding that other people have seen things differently and have experienced things differently.
Love it. And then Dr. Campos-Davis?
All of the books that I've heard have been wonderful, and I've read quite a few of them. I think what I wanted to mention is actually something called the Zen Education Project. I don't know how many of you are aware of this. This is essentially an effort by historians across the country, both in K through 12 and also in college, to teach what they call people's history, which is the history of Latinos, the history of Blacks in America, the history of the indigenous in America, all of the different parts of our history that are often overlooked. And the Zen Education Project has little, everything from how to teach kindergartners about certain parts of history all the way through, like I said, K through 12, and then even into college. And I've learned so much about those parts of history that I never knew anything about. And I think that learning that's such an important part of understanding that implicit bias that we were talking about.
And just a few more books that I'm going to put in the notes here, but Ibram X. Kendi's Stand from the Beginning is pretty extensive, but it's definitely worth the read. The Debt by Randall Robbins, Andrew Hacker's Two Nations, New Jim Crow, Between the World and Me is a short, extremely powerful book, and then Just Mercy.
I'll say Just Mercy, yeah.
Is another great one. And if you watch the movie, that doesn't count as reading the book. That goes for any.
Well, True Justice is the documentary about that on HBO, and I think that's as powerful as the movie is. As great as I thought Jamie Foxx was, I think True Justice, the documentary about Bryan Stevenson, is really good.
Great stuff. Okay, thank y'all for hanging on for an extra 12 minutes. Again, cannot express enough gratitude for everybody on the panel and everyone who hung around to listen live and is listening to this afterwards. So really appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody, and we will all talk soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Mark.